So my understanding is that Wade, who called in today, he listens to nearly all, if not all, of the episodes I put out, which I appreciate. But, assuming he listened to the episode about drones, I'm stunned that he would then call in and parrot all of the talking points that were so easily dispensed with and discredited in that show. And he called more than once, but I only had time to play one of them. And, but he said everything you would have guessed. If a guy's really, really bad, then it's okay to completely dispense with his constitutional rights. We get the bad guys this way with drones because we can't use the police in foreign countries. And we hit them this way so that we can kill them without them hurting us and at the same time. And all this completely ignores the presumption of innocence, which is a fundamental part of our judicial system. The fact that without judicial due process, we literally cannot be sure if a person is guilty. So we are putting people to death without deciding that they're guilty officially. And it's just, it's only coming from the executive branch with no judicial oversight, completely wiping away the balance of powers in our government. It completely ignores the existence of an organization like Interpol, which exists specifically to track criminals internationally. So of course we could use police work to go after people like this, and then completely ignores blowback and the creation of more terrorists when we kill, people in so-called collateral damage. Of course, the families of those who are killed are going to hate America for generations, and some will become terrorists and then kill Americans for generations to come. And so in the end, the only reason to do it is because it might feel like the right thing to do at the time, but it only makes sense if you completely ignore all of the broader implications and context. And so then to the second caller's point, we can all pretend that it's constitutional. I know he's coming at it from a good place, but making that point that it's constitutional because we're pretending to be at war. We went to war in reaction to a criminal act. That was George Bush's doing. And you literally can't go to war against an idea, an organization like Al-Qaeda. You go to war against nations. Armies fight armies, not individuals. And so we went to war in reaction to a criminal act in exactly the opposite way that we reacted to a criminal act of terror like the Oklahoma City bombing. Timothy McVeigh wanted to start a war with his act of terrorism too, just like bin Laden did, only bin Laden was actually successful with his goal. Let me read a little bit from a very old article. This is almost 10 years old. It was written in April 2003 by Tom Hartman, regular contributor to Best of the Left. And this is what Tom has to say on, this is called The Crime of the Century, a Never-Ending War Against Terrorism. And so in between 2002 and 2004, he says this is a good time to sit down in a library or bookstore and browse, quote, the Turner Diaries and Gore Vidal's, quote, Perpetual War for Perpetual Peace. The former was the inspiration for Timothy McVeigh. The latter includes his self-written eulogy. Together, they show how terrorist McVeigh chose the wrong administration and terrorist Osama bin Laden, by luck of the draw, chose the right one to harm American democracy. The Turner Diaries is an apocalyptic novel that opens with a convenience store robbery and ends with an Armageddon-style worldwide Holocaust, leaving only the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants standing. The government of the United States responds to a terrorist attack, the bombing of a federal building in Oklahoma. This was written before the Oklahoma City bombing. It says the government of the United States responds to a terrorist attack, the bombing of a federal building in Oklahoma, by cracking down on dissent, expanding the power of the executive branch, and shredding constitutional civil rights protections. White patriots respond by declaring war against the government that had once tried to take away their guns. Thus begins the cycle of violence that ends with the ultimate worldwide war, a vision straight out of the book of Revelation. But Tim McVeigh's expectation of a repressive federal reaction to his right-wing terrorism ran into a snag. Bill Clinton knew the difference between a rogue nation and a rogue criminal. Like every president since George Washington, Bill Clinton knew that nations only declare war against nations, while armies deal with rogue states, police deal with criminals, be they domestic or international. Like Germany's response to the Red Army faction, Italy's response to the Red Brigades, and Greece's response to the 17th of November terrorist group, among others. Clinton brought the full force of the criminal justice system against McVeigh, and even had Interpol and overseas police agencies looking for possible McVeigh affiliates. The result was that the trauma of the Oklahoma City terrorist bombing was limited, closure was achieved for its victims, the civil rights of all Americans were largely left intact, and the United States government was able to get back to its constitutionally defined job of ensuring life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for its citizens. Every president from Washington to Clinton understood the logic expressed by our founders when James Madison on April 20th, 1795 wrote, quote, "Of all the enemies to public liberty, war is perhaps the most to be dreaded because it compromises and develops the germ of every other. War is the parent of armies. From these proceed debts and taxes, and armies and debts and taxes are the known instruments for bringing the many under the domination of the few. No nation could preserve its freedom under the midst of continual warfare." The crime of 9/11 has often been cited to rationalize the loss of civil liberties and the ongoing traumatizing of the American people with daily terror alerts and a never-ending war on terror. But 9/11 wasn't an act of war because it wasn't done against us by a nation. It was instead a crime perpetrated by a criminal and his followers. It was a horrific crime, certainly, a crime that required strong, swift, and sure response. But Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda are not nations. Bin Laden was a criminal, and his group was a Middle Eastern sort of mafia with terrorist ambitions. To continue using our military against a criminal organization will only compound the horrific crime of 9/11, because armies aren't particularly good at police work. It's time to restore civil liberties to Americans, rein in an executive branch intoxicated by warfare, and hand over to American and international police agencies the very real and very big job of dealing with the remnants of Al-Qaeda around the world and prevent a recurrence of 9/11 by investigating who was involved and how they pulled it off in the first place. Anything less will simply perpetuate this crime of the century. So remember, that was written in 2003. He was already talking about the loss of civil liberties and an executive branch run wild with power, with expanded war powers. And in this country, we make terrible decisions because we have terrible information to work with, as I think shown in today's episode. Foreigners who see American media either pity us or just laugh. It's pathetic, and we get what we deserve because we have the media we're willing to settle for. We don't demand more, so we get the lowest common denominator. And if we had a media that told us what was going on and people actually understood not only what our government was doing in our name and what civil liberties we were losing, but also took into consideration the broader implications and context of actions being taken in our name and the effects that they will have in the future, I think we would have nothing to do with it. But of course, we have no idea.